My stepmother falsely accused me of abuse at 15 to hide her affair. My father threw me out on the streets. But 16 years later, when he asked me to gift a house to his daughter, I exploded and revealed that girl was never his child. I destroyed them all. I'm 31 years old. I work in real estate development, and what I'm about to tell you basically destroyed my entire family. Although, if I'm being honest, my family was already destroyed a long time ago. It's just that nobody knew it except me. I've been carrying this information for 16 years, and when it finally came to light a few months ago, it was like watching a nuclear bomb explode in slow motion. You know, one of those where you know it's going to make a mess, but you still can't look away. I guess I should start at the beginning. My mom died when I was 4. Cancer. I don't remember much about her. Honestly, just vague flashes of a woman with long hair who smelled like vanilla, or at least that's what my brain decided to remember. My dad, Patrick, he's like 58 now, was devastated. But he also had to raise me alone. And he wasn't exactly the warm and understanding type, you know what I mean? He was strict, military type. Everything had to be perfect and in order. I basically grew up walking on eggshells, trying not to do anything that would upset him. When I was 7, Dad met Marilyn. At first, she seemed super nice, you know, one of those people who smile all the time and make you feel special. She'd buy me things, bake me cookies, ask about my day at school. I thought I was finally going to have something like a mom. They got married like 6 months after meeting, and for a while things were good. But then, when I was 9, my half-sister Danielle was born, and that's when everything changed, literally overnight. Suddenly Marilyn didn't have time for me anymore, didn't care about my stuff. I basically stopped existing to her except when I did something wrong. And Dad, well, he was so excited to have a biological daughter with Marilyn that I also became second fiddle. Danielle was perfect. Danielle was brilliant. Danielle was everything I wasn't, according to them. I could get good grades and barely get a nod, but Danielle could draw a scribble and they'd act like she'd painted the Sistine Chapel. Don't get me wrong, I never hated Danielle. She was just a kid. None of it was her fault. But the difference in treatment was so obvious that even my teachers noticed. There were times I'd show up to school in the same clothes 2 days in a row because Marilyn forgot to wash my laundry while Danielle had a closet full of new dresses. Dad worked a lot, so he didn't notice half the things that were going on. Or maybe he did notice and just didn't care. I'll never know. Years went by, and I basically became the invisible kid in the house. Did my chores, kept my head down, counted the days until I could leave. I thought maybe I could go to college, get a scholarship, escape from there, and never look back. But then what happened when I was 15, and all those plans went to hell. It was a Saturday in April, or maybe May. I don't remember exactly. I'd gone out for a bike ride because it was basically the only way to get out of the house without Marilyn putting me to work on some stupid task. I passed by the park near our house. That small park with the rusty swings and the basketball court with the broken net. And I saw Marilyn. At first I thought she was with a friend or something, but then I saw her kissing a guy, and it wasn't a casual peck on the cheek, it was a real kiss. You know what I mean? I froze. Literally couldn't move. The guy was Craig. I knew him because he worked at the hardware store where Dad bought stuff sometimes. He was younger than Marilyn, maybe like 35 at the time, with tattoos on his arms, and he always smelled like cigarettes. They saw me after a minute, and Marilyn's face, God, I'd never seen someone go from panic to anger so fast. I got out of there pedaling as fast as I could. I got home with my heart racing a mile a minute, not knowing what to do with that information. Did I tell Dad? Did I keep quiet? I was 15. I didn't know how to handle something like that. I decided to stay away from Marilyn and wait to see what happened. Maybe she'd end the relationship or something. But things got worse. One night, like 2 weeks later, I was in my room doing homework when I heard Marilyn talking on the phone in the hallway. My bedroom door was cracked open and she didn't know I was there. I guess because she was speaking low, but I could hear her perfectly. She was crying, talking to someone, probably Craig, and she said something that froze my blood. She said, I can't keep doing this. Patrick can never know that Danielle is yours. He'd kill us both. You know what I mean? Danielle, my 6-year-old half-sister, wasn't my dad's daughter. She was Craig's daughter, the hardware store guy Marilyn was having an affair with. Everything suddenly made sense. Danielle's darker hair, the brown eyes when Dad and Marilyn had light eyes, details I'd never questioned until that moment. I sat there in my room, feeling like the world was falling apart. I didn't know what to do with that information. It was too big, too horrible. And I was 15. Damn it. I could barely decide what to eat for dinner, much less how to handle a secret that could destroy my entire family. I made the mistake of changing my behavior. I started avoiding Marilyn completely. Wouldn't talk to her unless it was absolutely necessary. Would leave the room when she entered. And she noticed, obviously. I could see the paranoia in her eyes every time she looked at me, that constant question of how much I knew exactly. And then, like a month after I'd overheard that conversation, Marilyn did the unthinkable. I came home from school one day, and there were 2 police officers in the living room. Dad was there, with a face I'd never seen before, like a mix of fury and disgust. Marilyn was crying on the couch, with Danielle in her arms, and they all looked at me when I walked in. Turns out, Marilyn had completely made up out of nowhere that I had touched Danielle inappropriately. She said I'd been doing it for 2 months, that she'd just found out that I was a dangerous predator. The cops asked me questions, searched my room, talked to Danielle, who clearly had no idea what was going on and was just repeating what Marilyn had told her to say. There was no proof, no evidence because nothing had ever happened. But there was also no way to prove my innocence. It was my word against Marilyn's, and who was going to believe a troubled teenager over a concerned mother? Dad looked at me through the whole interrogation like I was a monster, like he'd already decided I was guilty without even hearing my side. After the cops left, saying they were going to continue investigating, Dad completely lost his mind. He started yelling at me, telling me I was a disgrace, that Mom would be devastated if she were alive to see what I'd become. I tried to explain, tried to tell him the truth about Marilyn and Craig, about what I'd overheard, but he just yelled louder, calling me a liar, saying I was trying to manipulate him. And then he said, "You have 10 minutes to pack your things and get out of my house. I don't want to see you ever again." I stood there, waiting for it to be some kind of cruel joke, but Dad had already turned around and gone upstairs. Marilyn was looking at me from the couch with this triumphant expression, like she'd won some twisted game. I went up to my room shaking, stuffed some clothes in a backpack, grabbed the $47 I had saved from birthdays and odd jobs, and left that house. I was 15 years old, nowhere to go, no relatives I knew well enough to ask for help. Mom had been an only child and her parents had died before I was born. Dad's family lived in another state and we'd never been close. The first few days I slept in the park, in those tube things on the playground. It was cold at night, and I was constantly afraid that someone would find me or do something to me. I ate what I could buy at convenience stores with the little money I had, trying to make it last as long as possible. I kept going to school at first because I didn't know what else to do. But after a week, I stopped going because I didn't have clean clothes, and the other kids were starting to notice something was wrong. Eventually, I found an abandoned warehouse in the industrial part of town. One of those old buildings that used to be factories or something. There were other homeless people there, mostly adults, some with addiction problems, others just with bad luck. I kept away from most of them at first, but then I met Milton. Milton was like 50, maybe older, hard to tell with the life he'd lived. He'd been a soldier, then had problems with alcohol after coming back from the war, lost his family, his job, everything. But he was a good guy, or at least he was good to me. He taught me how to survive on the streets, where to get free food, what places to avoid, how to stay warm in winter. He kind of became something like a father figure during those horrible months. I lived like that for almost a year. A whole year being a homeless teenager, scrounging for food in restaurant trash, showering in public bathrooms when I could, sleeping in that cold warehouse with a thin blanket Milton had given me. I never told anyone my real age because I was afraid they'd send me back to Dad or put me in the foster care system, which, according to Milton, was worse than the streets. When I was 16, almost 17, Milton told me his cousin Gerald had a restaurant in the city, like 2 hours away, and that maybe he could get me a job washing dishes if I told him I was of age. Milton wrote me something like a fake reference letter, gave me the last $30 he had for the bus, and told me, "Get out of here, Peter. Don't get trapped in this life like me." I arrived in the city not knowing exactly what to expect. Gerald was a huge guy with a reddish beard and a laugh that made the windows shake. He looked me up and down, clearly not believing I was 18, like my fake ID said, which I'd gotten through another guy at the warehouse. But he gave me the job anyway. It paid crap, like $5 an hour under the table, but it included 1 meal per shift, and Gerald let me sleep in the restaurant storage room for the first few months. I worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes more, washing dishes, cleaning floors, basically doing whatever they needed. It was hard work, but honest. And for the first time in over a year, I had regular food and a safe place to sleep. I started saving every penny I could, sleeping in that storage room for almost 2 years, until I finally had enough to rent a tiny room in a shared apartment with 3 other guys. It was at the restaurant where I met Vanessa. She worked as a waitress while studying at the local university. Business, something, I think. She was pretty, like really pretty, but what really caught my attention was that she treated me like a person, not like the weird kid who lived in the storage room and was clearly hiding something. She'd ask how I was doing, we'd chat during breaks. She'd bring me coffee when she noticed I was exhausted. After like 6 months of this, she asked if I wanted to study for my GED. With her, I'd casually mentioned I hadn't finished high school, and she just assumed I wanted to. Truth is, I hadn't thought about it. I was so focused on just surviving day to day that education seemed like this impossible luxury. But Vanessa was persistent, like really persistent, and eventually I agreed. We'd study at the restaurant after shifts, or sometimes at the public library. Vanessa would explain math, English, science, all those things I was supposed to have learned in high school, but never did because I was busy being a homeless teenager. It took like a year and a half, but eventually, I passed the GED exam. I cried when I got the certificate. First time I'd cried since that night, Dad kicked me out of the house. Vanessa also helped me get a better job. Her dad worked in real estate development, one of those guys who buys old properties, fixes them up and sells or rents them. He needed someone to do basic maintenance and general work, and Vanessa recommended me. Vanessa's dad, Mr. Johnson, gave me a chance even though my resume was basically washed dishes for 3 years. Turned out I was pretty good with construction and repair work. I learned fast, worked hard, never complained. Mr. Johnson started teaching me about the business, not just the physical aspect, but also the finances, negotiations, the real estate market. He kind of became my mentor, though I never told him my whole story. He just knew I came from a difficult family situation and that I was trying to build a better life. Vanessa and I started dating when I was 21, and she was 22. By then, I was already earning a decent salary, had my own small apartment, had even bought a used car. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Something I'd built myself without anyone's help. We got married. 2 years later, in a small ceremony with just a few friends, Milton couldn't come. He died of pneumonia the previous winter, but I feel like he would have been proud. I kept working with Mr. Johnson, eventually becoming his junior partner on some projects. When he retired like 5 years ago, he sold me his part of the business at a price that was basically a gift. Now I have my own real estate development company. It's nothing huge, but we're doing well. Vanessa and I have a nice house in a quiet neighborhood. We have a son, Logan, who's 3 now. From the outside, my life looks perfect, like the American dream and all that shit. But during all these years, 16 years to be exact, I carried that secret about Danielle. I never told anyone, not even Vanessa. What was I going to say? Oh, by the way, my half-sister isn't really my half-sister. And my stepmother falsely accused me of abuse to protect her secret. And my dad threw me out on the street and basically ruined my adolescence. It sounded crazy, like something from a cheap soap opera. I blocked out all that past, changed my phone number, didn't have social media, basically erased any trace of my previous existence. I thought maybe I could just move forward, build this new life, and pretend those first 15 years never happened. And it worked, more or less, for many years. Until like 6 months ago, Dad found me on Facebook. I don't know how. Maybe he hired someone to look for me. Maybe it was pure luck. He sent me a friend request and a long message talking about how he'd been looking for me for years, that he regretted how things had ended, that he wanted to reconnect, all that garbage. He said Marilyn also wanted to apologize, that they'd matured, that time had given perspective. I didn't respond for weeks. Vanessa found the message because she sometimes checked my Facebook for me, I practically don't use it, and asked me about it. I had to tell her something about the story, though not everything. I told her I'd had a serious fight with my dad when I was a teenager, that I'd left home young, that we'd been out of contact for years. She encouraged me to respond, to give him a chance, because family is family and all that. Eventually I responded, basically saying I was willing to talk, but no promises. Dad got super excited, started sending me messages every few days with updates about his life, photos of Danielle, who was now 24 and engaged. In the photos, she looked a lot like Craig, now that I think about it, but obviously nobody else noticed, or at least didn't mention it. After like 2 months of back and forth messages, Dad asked if they could come visit us. He said he wanted to meet Vanessa and Logan, see the life I'd built. I really didn't want to. Honestly, every fiber of my being told me this was going to end badly, but Vanessa was so excited that I was reconciling with my family that I agreed. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon. Dad looked old, like really old, even though he was only 58. Hair completely gray, face full of wrinkles, walked a bit hunched over. Marilyn also looked different, thinner, with that nervous look some people have who've lived with guilt for a long time. Danielle came with them and her fiancé, a guy who worked in finance and wouldn't stop talking about his investments. The visit was awkward as hell. Dad kept apologizing for the fight we had, as if it were something minor, as if he hadn't literally thrown me out on the street when I was a kid based on false accusations. Marilyn barely looked me in the eyes. Danielle was nice, but clearly confused about the whole situation. Nobody had told her the real details of why we'd been out of contact. We showed them the house, had an awkward dinner where Vanessa heroically tried to keep the conversation flowing, and then Dad said something that made me see red. We were in the living room after dinner, and he was looking around, commenting on how nice the house was, how much I'd achieved. And then he said, "You know, Peter, Danielle and her fiancé are house hunting. They've been saving, but prices are so high. Do you think maybe you could help them out? I mean, clearly you're doing well. And she's your sister." The silence that followed was deafening. I literally stared at him, trying to process if he'd really just asked me to give Danielle a house. After everything, after 16 years of zero contact, zero support, basically leaving me to die on the streets, he had the audacity to ask me to gift a property to his favorite daughter. Something broke in me at that moment. Like, all that rage I'd been storing for years just exploded. And before I could stop myself, before I could think about the consequences, I said, "Why should I give a house to someone who's not even really my sister?" Everyone looked at me like I'd gone insane. Vanessa touched my arm, like trying to calm me down, but I'd already started and couldn't stop. I looked directly at Marilyn and said, "Do you want to tell them, or should I? Want to tell everyone here about Craig from the hardware store, or about the phone conversation I overheard when I was 15? Marilyn's face went white as paper. Dad was confused, asking what I was talking about. Danielle looked somewhere between scared and upset, and I just let it all out. 16 years of stored truth coming out like vomit. I told them about seeing Marilyn kissing Craig in the park, about the phone conversation where she admitted Danielle was Craig's child, not Dad's, about how Marilyn had fabricated those horrible accusations against me to protect her secret. Marilyn tried to deny it at first, calling me a liar, saying I was making things up out of spite. But I had details, dates, specific things that only someone who'd been there could know. Dad sat there, processing, his face going through like 1,000 different emotions. Danielle started crying. Her fiancé looked like he wanted to disappear. Dad finally spoke, his voice sounding weird, kind of strangled, and said, "Are you saying Danielle isn't my daughter?" And I, God help me, said, "That's exactly what I'm saying." Ask Marilyn. Get a DNA test if you don't believe me. Marilyn broke down then, admitting through tears that yes, she'd had an affair with Craig, that yes, there was doubt about Danielle's paternity, but that she wasn't sure that it could be Dad's or Craig's. It was obviously a lie. Like if there'd been real doubt, she wouldn't have fabricated accusations against me to keep me quiet, but at that point, it didn't matter anymore. They left that night in the middle of screaming and tears. Dad was furious. Marilyn hysterical. Danielle devastated. Vanessa was looking at me like she didn't know me, and I don't blame her. I'd just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of our living room, destroying several people in the process, including Danielle, who literally hadn't done anything wrong in her entire life except exist. What followed were weeks of absolute drama. Dad did the DNA test, and obviously it confirmed Danielle wasn't his biological daughter. 24 years of believing she was his daughter, of raising this person, of loving her, all based on a lie. I can't even imagine how he felt, though part of me, the spiteful and bitter part, thought he deserved it for throwing me out without even hearing my side of the story. Dad confronted Marilyn, and the confrontation got violent. I don't know exactly what happened. I wasn't there, and the reports were confusing. But it ended with Marilyn in the hospital with 3 fractured vertebrae, and Dad arrested for assault. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, though he'll probably get out earlier with good behavior. Marilyn eventually admitted she was already on pain medication before the assault, like she already had an addiction problem nobody knew about. She entered rehab after getting out of the hospital. I don't know where she is now. Honestly, I don't care. Danielle, poor Danielle, completely fell apart. Her fiancé ended the engagement, couldn't handle all the family drama. She tried to find Craig, her biological father, only to discover he died from an overdose like 2 years earlier. So there she was, at 24, finding out the man she thought was her father wasn't, that her mother was a manipulative liar, that her real father was dead, that her whole life was basically a lie. She sent me some messages after everything happened, asking why I hadn't said something earlier, why I'd waited so long, and I didn't have a good answer. Honestly, what was I supposed to say? I tried to protect you by keeping the secret, only made everything worse in the end. Vanessa and I have been in couples therapy since all this happened. She was upset, like really upset, that I'd hidden so much of my past from her. She felt I didn't trust her, that our relationship was built on omissions and half-truths. And she was right, I guess. But also, how do you explain to someone you love that you were carrying this horrible secret that could destroy lives? There was no right way to handle the situation. 2 weeks ago, Danielle wrote to me again, saying she'd decided to move out of state, start fresh somewhere. Nobody knew her story. I haven't responded yet. I don't know what to tell her. I'm sorry, doesn't seem like enough, you know? The truth is, I probably ruined her life by letting that secret out, though in my defense, her life was already ruined, she just didn't know it. Now I feel empty more than anything else. I thought telling Dad the truth about Danielle would make me feel vindicated, like finally proving I'd been telling the truth all along, that Marilyn was the liar, that I wasn't the monster she'd painted me as. And I guess I achieved that, technically. Dad sent me a letter from prison apologizing, saying he should have believed me, that he ruined my life by believing Marilyn's lies, but it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like I just burned everything to the ground out of revenge. And yeah, maybe those people deserve to be burned, but that doesn't make the flames any less destructive. Logan is 3 now, and sometimes I look at him and think about what kind of person he's going to grow up to be, if he's going to carry the weight of all this family drama, if he's going to wonder why he doesn't have grandparents or aunts and uncles visiting him. Vanessa asks me sometimes if I regret saying something, and honestly, I don't know the answer. Part of me deeply regrets it, like that part that knows Danielle didn't deserve to have her world explode that way. But another part, that bitter part that spent years on the streets, that was falsely accused of something horrible, that lost its adolescence and family, that part thinks everyone is finally paying for what they did. I guess that's how these things work. There are no real happy endings, no clean resolution where everyone hugs and forgives each other. There's just rubble, and people trying to figure out how to move forward with the broken pieces of what their lives once were. And here I am, 31 years old, successful on paper, still carrying all this, wondering if I'm ever going to be able to truly let it go.